We are live. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Hope you guys are having a good holiday season. Hope all of your runs are going 12. It's that time of year.
Yeah.
Pretty chilly. Good time to warm up, stay bundled up, and play some Hearthstone.
It is a good time. It's also a good time in the meta for Rastakhan in general. I've been it's kind of a bipolar meta in Rastakhan right now. I think it's like a really good meta, and then you face a warrior. And then it's a really good meta again, and then you face another warrior. And the warriors aren't really a problem early on. It's more like after you get like 5-6 wins that the warriors start becoming kind of ridiculous. So you're in a nice safe zone for most of your games. Although later on it becomes more like a random roll, whether you meet up with a warrior and it's not fun and you know what's going to happen, or you meet up with another class, even other control classes, right? Like Mage or like Priest or whatever, which are like, they're powerful, but they seem fair. Warriors at high win rates just kind of break all the rules that exist in the arena for what you should expect.
That is true. I mean, when you get to high wins, those decks seem unfair. And yet, another pitch to play aggro.
Yes.
Because all of the powerful tools that you are afraid of when you go into a control v control battle, oh my god, I do not care at all, right? Like, a good aggro deck, or not even a good aggro deck, like an aggro deck that is piloted well.
An aggro deck that can get you to 8 wins.
Right.
Can get you to 12 wins.
Yes. And you're in fact afraid of the first few wins in which people just have random kind of like mid-range decks. People draft a little bit too light and they'll get slammed by like, you know, any other deck. But for your deck, like your aggro deck, it's perfectly tuned to just like
That's like most of my decks.
Bit.
I feel like I take care of aggro super well because all of my decks are in that like weird mid-rangey area that like wrecks aggro and gets wrecked by control.
Yeah, definitely. But it is absolutely correct because I haven't been playing too much this week. I know you've been playing a lot, but I've been watching a decent amount of streams, and it's definitely how I've seen people like Dreads and Collins and Shady have success. You know, they're really looking at the meta and being like, okay, people are being greedy. I'm going to be greedier or as greedy, and I'm going to make better decisions than you, right? And draw out the game. So they're using their experience, but, you know, they are drafting all the big tools and essentially saying, I'm going to get to 6 and 7 wins. And after that, I'm not really facing Merps hunters. Like, for, you know, people like saw my guide, but I don't like it didn't gain like a widespread popularity. And what's popular in that range, it's still the warriors, it's still the big control mages, priests, right? You see a ton of priests being really annoying still, and that's what you're going to face way up there.
I will say I absolutely love facing priests because what priests can handle is mid-range. It's something mages handle decently. Warriors wreck on mid-range, but priests don't do anything to mid-range because guess what? Every one of my creatures has 4 attack, and guess what? They can mind control. Nothing of any value. It's a pretty fail-safe plan against priests. And when they take my cards suck. Like, it's a silly mid-range deck.
This is also the best thing about when I play Hunter and then they steal a card from my deck. I'm just like, all right, have fun with the River Croc. That was super essential for me, but really is doing nothing for you.
Yeah. The Priest really, it has better matchups against control. And it has pretty crappy matchups against everyone else. So I would still not recommend Priest in this meta. The win rates on HS Replay for Priest are going up a bit, but I think it's in kind of an awkward position right now. Anyway, let's go back to this whole aggro v control thing and start on the control side this time. We started on the aggro side on the last episode because even though warriors were still dominant and are still dominant, the aggro side really made a bigger push than the control side in this meta compared to Boomsday. Because Boomsday was a lot more favorable towards control. Now it's a little bit more evened out. But control is still here. Control is still strong. Question whether it is strongest now because it feels overall pretty balanced. You just... Like, if you take Warrior out of the equation, it feels pretty balanced among the other classes. But it's still, like, more than a viable position. So Let's start off a little with how control works in the Rastakhan meta. Aside from warrior, which we're always going to set warrior aside. So if you wanna play warrior, just like follow the general tips, but know that you have some insane advantages. What you need for a proper control deck, and I see people like mess this up all the time. They're like, I'm going to draft control. What does that mean? All the big cards. No, that's not control. What you instead need are very specific categories of cards. So one, probably the most important part of control, and the part that most people miss, and it's like, I get it, it's counterintuitive, but probably the most important thing to drafting any control deck, no matter which class you are 3-drops. Because you are probably going to have a lot fewer 1 and 2 drops than you would normally do in any other kind of archetype. So you need to make up for it in 3-drop. If you miss a 3-drop as a control deck, you're going to lose. Not just to aggro, but you're going to lose to other control decks too. So, because they're going to have 3-drops. And in order to make sure you have enough 3-drops, you need like a bare minimum of 6. You really should have 8. Like when you're playing a control deck. And you may be thinking, whoa, that's like a lot of cards that are not really all that big. But consider that you have almost no 1 or 2 drops. So if you would normally in a normal deck, in a normal mid-range deck, I like to have 6 1 to 2 drops, right? At least. And then I also like to have 4 or 5 3-drops. So that's a total of something like 11 cards dedicated to drops on 1 through 3. You only have like 8. So you're 3 cards up on me in terms of size, right? And I'm a mid-range deck. I'm not even an aggro deck. If you look at Merps' like aggro drafting style, it's like 3 1-drops and like 8 2-drops and then like 6 3-drops, right? You're going to super outvalue that. You don't need to outvalue people by like 18 cards. That's not doing anyone any good. You need to, on the other hand, you need to have some kind of presence on the board so that you cannot die to like less finely tuned aggro decks than what Merps Hunters normally do, right? Because that's like extreme. You're going to face a lot more like fairly aggressive decks than super extreme aggressive decks. And if you're a control deck and you're like, well, if I face a super aggressive deck, I lose, that's fine. But you still have to be able to take care of the pretty aggressive, like more aggressive than mid-range decks. Because if you're losing to those as well, and then you're losing to some mid-range decks, and you're losing to some control decks that are more like, just more value than you, you're not winning a lot. So number one key is 3-drops. Get them. And within the 3-drops, there are good 3-drops for control and bad 3-drops for control. A lot of people also think that, I have a card that's playable on 3 and somewhat decently statted. That's a good enough thing for a 3-drop. You're going to want to prioritize differently if you know you're going for control. You're going to want 3 4s and 2 4s much more highly than you're going to want 4 3s, for example, because you're not going to have anything to support you before you get there, and your health is more important than your attack in terms of these creatures, because they're going to match up against 2-drops a lot of times rather than purely against 3-drops. You're like, that's a big one. And a similar note, you're not going to want things that are better when you're on the board. So nothing that needs to like survive a turn and grow. Nothing that's like Wasp is not good. It trades 1 for 1 against something. Remember, you're trading against 2-drops. So a 3-drop that trades 1-on-1 against a 2-drop, Wasp may be rated highly by everybody, but if you're getting Raptor value out of it for 3 mana, that's not good. So that's the biggest mistake I see people drafting control. So if you're like, control's not working for me, maybe this is just an aggro meta or like a mid-range meta. No, it's also still a control meta, but tune your drafting. There are definitely more faster decks now. So whereas before in Boomsday you may have been punished less, it would have still been inefficient. You would have still been being punished if you drafted not enough 3s. But now you're going to be punished very heavily in this meta.
Yeah, I agree. And we talk about very aggressive decks, but I will say, looking at the meta, those don't really exist. We have aggro-ish decks, right? Relatively, because decks will always be aggro compared to the field.
Right.
We still, I came out with my guide, and I was hoping that a lot of people would kind of catch on and start to play my style of Hunter. It hasn't really happened yet, at least when I see streams like, Shady and Collins and Dreads, they face Hunter sometimes. It's never Merps Hunters. Or like, I see what they're doing, and even if they drafted my deck, they're certainly not playing like I would play. So if you're thinking of, all right, what do I get more punished by? You can afford to, say, all right, I'm going to try to beat all of these warriors, because you're going to face a lot of these warriors that are trying to draft greedy. You're not going to face a lot of true aggressive hunters. A lot of them are what I would consider very mid-range, right? They're ADWCTA hunters.
Actual aggressive, like actual aggro decks, I maybe see once every 15 to 20 games. Once.
Yeah, and right, and that's even if you could categorize as that. And for them, they're probably still not even drafting how I would go all in. Like
right,
I
but
go
they're
like
still they're more aggressive that you can't consider them mid range. Like
yes, definitely.
They're more on the aggro side, the mid range side.
Right, you survive their first 5 turns, you're good.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Yep.
So yeah. I mean. And I don't want all this to scare you. The deep fried meta that's going to come up, in a bit is about reverting to mid range in a draft. About basically when your aggro or control draft fails, you have to go back to mid range, and it's there because mid range works very well. I have like a really high average right now. I did in Boomsday in the first month as well, and it just playing mid range and outplaying people, because what mid range gives you is more options than aggro or control by definition. That's the whole point of mid-range. It's not good at anything, but it gives you more options than anything, and it lets you, over the course of the game, kind of exert your skill. So when the meta's soft, like aggro is really good because it condenses your decision making, but mid-range is usually just as good. And control suffers a bit because control you got to get to a certain point before control works. And so just like don't we talk about archetypes more like how you play it, how you draft it, and what's viable, and it's a good meta overall for all this diversity. So we'll get to that in a bit, but let's go back to control. After the 3-drop portion, a lot of people, here's something to stay away from when you're making a control deck, and I know a lot of people try to draft this way in control. I see like good streamers draft that way, and I really think that their games will be improved if they value these things lower. And that's big things that don't taunt, have no initiative, and don't do anything. Those are not, like, if you're control, you either already have the game controlled at the point that a 7, 8, 9, 10 mana card can come down, and then you're good. You don't need those cards to win. Card draw will do you just as well, right? And card draw can be played earlier if you want to skip a turn and set something up. So it fails if you're already in control. And if you're not in control and you're still fighting for control, those big cards are the most easily punished thing. And if you're not fighting for control so much as you're fighting to prevent damage to your face, because you need to stabilize on the face front, not just the board side, then they do absolutely nothing. Like, if you put down, I don't know, like a line breaker or something, right? Oh, it's a big 7-drop or whatever. It does nothing. If you put down the Dire Horn, this is back to the Dire Horn argument for control decks now, rather than for like aggro decks. If we're talking about for aggro decks, oh, it's so slow. It's 7 mana. For control decks, you don't really care about turn 7. You're going to get to turn 7 very easily. But that still doesn't make it a good card because it's not doing stuff for you. It's not like doing the things you needed to do. Instead, it's just kind of a card advantage engine that doesn't set you back on tempo if it sticks. The one exception to this is Violet Worm, because it has such a huge death rattle, and the death rattle actually scales based on how few things you have on the board. So it's a well-designed card. It's still a little overpowered, but it's overall, in terms of how good it is for aggro and control, it's very well designed. So that's like, and it's still under bucketed. I don't know, they need to bucket that card better. But Violet Worm aside, pretty much any other card that you take that's 6 mana or above should either taunt, heal, or like have some kind of initiative, whether it's deal some damage or rush or some other thing, or draw another card at least. Because then you're drawing into potential initiative or heals or taunts. The actual big Boulder Fist Ogre type deals, not actually very good for control. Probably better, like much better for mid-range than for control. Because as mid-range, you're often on the board, and you need something to not get board cleared. And a really big thing is really good to not get board cleared, because if they board clear you, your really big thing's still going to be alive. When if they hard remove your big thing, the rest of your stuff is still going to be alive, right? It's like a great hedge. So if you're wondering, like, oh, do big things just all suck? No, they don't. They're great for mid-range. But that's mid-range. That's not control. So if you find yourself drafting a lot of big stuff, stop thinking of yourself as a control deck. You're now a mid-range deck.
I mean, big stuff can certainly work for control. But, yeah, like, if you're looking at big stuff, when is big stuff really, really powerful? When it's the topper to something, right? When it's not just alone there. And I think that is, correct me if I'm wrong, that's sort of what you're like hinting at as well. It's like if you're looking at, for example, a 7/7, the power of a 7/7 isn't it coming out onto the board and kind of like, having to do all of the stuff by itself. The power of it is being backed up by all of the stuff that preceded it, and then putting your opponent in a bind, right? Like suddenly the 7/7, it's like, well, if I AoE, the 7/7 is still alive. If I remove the 7/7, everything that came before is still alive. And then you present this problem, and that's really what mid-range tries to do. It effectively, try to put your opponent in a spot in which it's like, yeah, I've like kind of put a lot of resources out there, and more so than you, but I'm betting that you don't have like 2 to 3 cards to get rid of this,
right?
Like I'm sort of saying like, well, if you have the runner, sure, but 99% of the time you don't have it, and I'm going to win based off of that.
Yeah. And again, don't take this as never take big drops if you're in a control deck. It's about what your other options are, right? Like, if your other option is a 2-drop you don't need, and then a bad card or over bucketed card, then yeah, take the big drop. It's playable in a control deck, right? In a way, it's not playable in an aggro deck. Yeah. But you should not be targeting them, and you should never ever feel like, oh, I don't have enough big cards in this deck in terms of like large minions. That's not a thing. There's no category, even in the slowest control deck, of need more large minions. No. Need more large taunts, need more board clears, need more heals, need more card draw, need more like stuff, right? So of all of the things you need as a control deck, one single large creature, whether it's a Boulderfist Ogre or a Line Breaker, that's at the bottom of your list. Like, you'll take it if you have to. Just like in aggro, if you don't have enough, like, let's say, if you don't have enough 2-drops, a 2-mana 2/2 is fine, right? You're not like too sad about it, but you don't want it. Like, if you have any other options to fill something else that is good for an aggro deck, you don't want the 2-mana 2/2. That's what these large cards are for control. Like, you'll take it over, if you're an aggro deck, you take a 2-mana 2/2 over a 7-mana 7/7. Hands down, any day of the week. If you're a control deck, you take a 7-mana 7/7 over a 2-mana 2/2 any day of the week. But in neither case are you like, oh, that's a good card, I'll take that over another somewhat useful card.
Yep, agreed.
Okay. So we've gone over aggro, we've gone over control. What are some good control classes that you see these days for people who want to go control? We've talked about aggro, sure. And we'll just fill it in again if you missed the last Lightforge. Hunter, really good for aggro right now. And you see people doing a lot of things, or
mid-range as well,
or mid-range as well. But if you're just looking to go aggro, like, this is like, you have a mindset of like, I want to play aggro decks. Hunter's very good. Paladin's very good. Well, Paladin's better than their other stuff.
And
Druid
Paladin
is very
more
good.
Like snowball-y tempo-ish, right? Like, you still kind of need support for it because you don't have that hero power. Hunter is kind of the only class in which you can just win by just, you have no hand by turn 5, and you're just like, all right, I'm gonna hero power my way to victory. Right. So it's a different type of,
well, it's more face, but they're both aggro. Like, if you're splitting the world into aggro, mid-range, control, right? 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Your hunters, your paladins, your druids are very good at going aggro. Your rogues can go aggro, but it's not the best. Mages and priests don't really have the option to go aggro. Shamans you should never touch, just period. And warriors they're okay going aggro, but they're just so good at going control that why would you not start at control? And with the buckets, you can always start in one direction, right? And this is deep fried meta coming up. And if your draft is making it not so good, you ease back into mid-range. Rather than needing to start in before buckets, you have to start in mid-range. Because if you try to start anywhere else, the draft is going to push you to mid-range anyway, so why? Right?
Yeah.
Here, now, most of your drafts, or at least half of your drafts, you can probably stay in your archetype that you want. And then the other half, to like 1/3 of the drafts, you'll get pushed back into the mid-range. And a key to having a good draft is to recognize when these things are happening.
Yep. All right. So, are we talking about the deep fried meta now, or we're still?
Yeah. Well, you want to describe a few of the ways that, like, for people, because we haven't gone into classes too deeply besides Hunter
Right.
and Warrior, and Rogue hasn't changed, so we have Rogue covered.
Yeah.
But
Let's shine the spotlight on Mage for a little bit,
Okay.
because I think that is the class that has really changed, other than Hunter, right? Like Warrior, they've been good, they're still good. Mage has found new life in Rastakhan's Rumble. If you guys remember, previous to this expansion, mages were in a pretty bad place.
Yeah.
They didn't have the tools to go sort of toe to toe with the Warriors. They didn't have that much initiative. They were just a little bit awkward. They could not go that aggressive either. So they didn't have like a real identity. But now mages, with, for example, like Blast Wave and just kind of like the new tools that they have, they're able to play the control game. They have enough initiative. They have enough stuff to go toe to toe with the priests and the warriors.
Pyromaniac for also draw.
Yeah, definitely. So suddenly, just with the introduction of an expansion, they can sort of go up against the warriors and go up against the priests, and still have all of these tools to kind of fight off the aggro as well. And I haven't played a lot of Mage myself, but I know like Shady and Collins have had a lot of success with mages.
Hey, I've had a lot of success with Mage.
You have, but you only play a certain amount as well.
Right.
We do not play as much as a lot of the other streamers do. And it seems like a lot of streamers are really liking mages right now. And the win rate, they're number 4 in win rate on HS Replay, but everyone plays Mage, right? Like so many people default to Mage. So
we've been saying this for like 4 years. Mage is one of the like most differential between top players and average players. It's a high skill class. Even back when Mage was dominating, and everyone's like, "Oh, Mage, no skill." I'm like, no. Like based on the hero power on their cards, Mage is actually very high skilled. They just also happen to be OP. Well, now Mage is not OP. So now the skill differential is starting to show through.
Yeah, it was easier, very easy back then to just take your Firelands portal on turn 7 and click on the thing that has 5 health, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was very easy, and then you probably win off of that. But now you have to set things up, right? Even something as OP as Blast Wave, extremely OP, but requires a lot of setup as well. So that is something that is skill testing and rewards you for like better turn planning. So Mage is definitely something that if you guys have not been playing it, check it out. And
it feels good too. Like
it feels good.
It feels much better than Warrior, because Warrior just feels stupid to play. It doesn't matter if you're winning or losing to it. It feels terrible to play. But for Mage, you actually feel like you're playing a control class, because Mage and Priest were always the 2 traditional control classes.
I will say I never play Warrior anymore. And it got to the point where I remember about a year ago, I played Warrior a ton. It was like I liked, obviously, Hunter was my number 1, but number 2, I loved playing Warrior. And I think other than Hunter, I had like a ton of 12-win Warriors on our YouTube, right? Because it was just fun. It was like the tempo and aggro kind of switch playstyle that I really liked. And now, like you said, it's just not profitable for me to draft or play that way, because the draft will continually push me into the Warpaths and Dragon Roars, which I can't go face with that. Like I just can't.
Yep. So yeah, Mage is a very good control class right now. Priest hasn't changed much, but it's still doing its thing. Warlocks can still go control. They're not as much of a powerhouse as they used to be, but the cards are still there, right? Your double-sided clears. You just need to back it up with a good amount of taunts and stuff. The issue with Warlock right now is actually interesting, because you wonder why I would highlight Priest and Mage more, even though I think Warlock is still a higher win rate than Priest. It's because Warlocks can't go head to head with the Warrior. ever. A Warlock that's a control Warlock pretty much auto loses against a control warrior. For one reason, it can't generate cards. So the warrior, assuming it's a good deck, like by the time you get to 8 or 7 wins, I don't mean like if you're at like 3-2 or something, right? Like those warriors are warriors that did not make it. But the warriors that make the cut will always beat you because you have 30 cards in your deck, and your main way of gaining card advantage is to take one of those cards. It's not to like have big stuff. You actually probably have smaller stuff on your card on average than even a mid-range deck of any other class. You're just able to use your hero power to draw cards, and that's exactly what the warrior plays against. That's what Mech Assembly, that's what Dragon Roar plays against. Those add new cards to your hand that you can then play out, right? Warlocks take their own cards. Mage is able to compete now, not just because they have one really good card in Blast Wave, but because Blast Wave generates cards. And Mage has always been okay about generating cards, right? With the elemental synergies and like Simmering Tempest. They've always had a few options there. So now they've expanded that. And so now Mage can sort of go toe-to-toe with Warriors. Priest has always been able to, because Priests steal your opponent's cards, right? So that's all card generation that's not from your deck. So Mage is actually, like, control-wise, Mage is fine against Warriors. Mage's real downfall is against Hunters and any class that goes super fast, because it can't heal itself, right? Whereas Priests and Warriors can.
Definitely another wrinkle in the arena nowadays. We are at the point of the arena meta where historically, right now, this is the highest kind of occurrence of fatigue, right? Or where fatigue matters. I remember years ago when fatigue was just, you never reach fatigue.
Literally never.
Literally never reach fatigue. And if you did, it was one of those like YouTube highlight worthy kind of like, wow, what happened here? It was like you went toe to toe, your Yeti kept on hitting their Yeti, and literally it was like a Yeti battle, right? But now with all these warriors and with all these priests, yeah, you reach fatigue and you're just like, yeah, you know what? This is part of the game plan all along, you know? And so many games reach fatigue that it's actually a thing now, which is also why Warlocks just don't have it.
We need to make a Lightforge about fatigue, because I really think we never did it, because it was just not a concept for so long. And we've known that it's been a concept. Like, I find myself in so many games now being like, okay, so I'm only going to win this battle if we go to fatigue. Now let's do that. Like, I find myself saying that once out of every like 30 games or something. And fatigue matters probably in like 1 out of every like 10 games. Even more if I would play more control, but I play mostly mid-range.
Yeah, so this is kind of why, if you're playing a pure control Warlock, you're always just going to lose and fatigue yourself, right? The warrior is still going to have like 5-6 cards left by the time you have 0 cards. The warrior's just going to win out like that. And so we talked about this last week as well, but if you're a Warlock, you kind of have to go zoo, right? You can't just get grinded out. You have to be able to put some pressure on and then follow up on that pressure. Because if you're just trying to wait and remove and then try to flip the switch, every time you put something out there, you know, after a few turns, the warrior has accumulated so many cards that they're going to have the answers to what you put out. So if you are not putting out pressure starting from turn 1, you don't have much. And with that being said, if you're saying Merps, that's kind of tough to do. Yeah, and that's why Warlocks are not doing it that great these days. You know, they went from kind of chasing warriors for the number 1 spot a few months ago to just being very middle of the pack right now at number 5.
Now, I would argue their middle of the pack is, like you said, right? It's zoo. It's not on the backs of warriors. They're non-competitive with warriors. The worst matchup out of like anybody against warriors. Like, you're better with any other card class if you're doing control. If you're doing aggro, you're better with any other class doing aggro. Like, the warriors are gating Warlock's potential so much right now. But yeah, okay, let's do the deep fried meta. Deep fried meta, we'll make it quick, reverting to mid-range. This is like a draft question we got in in our Reddit that I thought was good to expand on, and it was said from the perspective of someone trying to do a hunter in the style that Merps talked about in his video and his post. And it's basically like, hey, I had to give this up because like I started with a high main, and then in the next card I was forced into, I forget what it was, some like 8 mana card or something. No, it was King Crush, like a 9 mana card. And he's like, and then I just kind of made like this like mid-rangey, like maybe even late game kind of hunter, and it worked out pretty well. But like, how do you like stick with aggro? And that's the wrong question. The question should never be, how do I stick with aggro? The question is more, when do I recognize that I can't be aggro anymore? Or that at least like my aggro is going to be weird. Like if you saw, there was an arena coup the last time we did Hunter, like 3 weeks ago, where I made what I thought was a very unoffensive pick for a, God, what was that? It was like a 3 mana 2/2, and we were playing Hunter. It was a 3 mana 2/2 mech.
Spider Bomb.
Death Rattle,
Hashtag
destroy a
never
minion.
Forget. Never forget.
And, you know, it's a very good card, very highly rated on the Lightforge.
Not a good card.
It puts 2 damage on the board, right? Which is like, let's say a 2/4 for 3 mana, right? Not great, but it's like a card that exists. It's not like a poisonous minion, for example. And if you're on the board, you get to control where the Death Rattle triggers, so it can do some more board tradey stuff. And Merps flips out and says, okay, we're mid-range now. Like, I just can't do aggression anymore. So you may not have to go that far in that direction, but that just gives you a sense of how much better a tightly wound aggro deck or a tightly wound control deck on the other side, it's the same thing, is, and how easy it is for a deck to need to flip the switch and go from aggro to faster mid-range, or even just regular mid-range, depending on like how far you slide, or from control to slower mid-range or mid-range. In Boomsday, you kind of had to do that sometimes, but you got punished for it because mid-range was really not the best in Boomsday. Like, if you were to like say which archetypes are better, mid-range would have been close to the bottom, if not at the very bottom. Now in Rastakhan, the meta moved up a turn or two in terms of the overall speed. Warriors like are gating the very end, but you can't have, like, one class can't drag the turn speed up, right? As long as you have mid-range and control and aggro decks that can win, they're going to push the turn speed up. So the turn speed's gone up a bit, and now mid-range works just as well as aggro and control. So I'm not saying you have to start with mid-range, but if your aggro deck is going to be a little more mid-range because your draft literally doesn't give you the options for it. If you go on the YouTube right now, you'll see we just released yesterday my 12-win Hunter run, which was like, I call it a busted combo Hunter deck, because we got offered like really freaking slow cards in the beginning, and I was like, all right, we're not going aggressive, let's go mid-range. And then we got offered cards also very early on that would synergize really, really well with Mystique or with Springpaw or with Unleash the Hounds, and then we just didn't get offered those for the rest of the draft. So it just ended up being like this janky, like mid-rangey, kind of slowish mid-rangey deck, because we're trying to go for combos, and we just didn't get the other half of the combo pieces. And it got 12 wins, and it was fine, because mid-range itself is fine. And it's not like, oh, I was just outskilled everyone and never used my hero power. My hero power got me like a third of my wins. But that's mid-range Hunter, right? You don't like ignore your hero power. You just use it as a win condition at the end of the game rather than throughout the game, the way you would do an Aggro Hunter. And the point being that mid-range for all classes works in this meta. Every single class. Mid-range is fine. So if you need to push your deck to mid-range, do it. A mid-range deck is hard to be poorly built, whereas a control deck or an aggro deck is easy to be poorly built. And then you just have a worse deck, and you're like, oh, why didn't my aggro or my control deck work? I only got 3 wins, and it felt like I couldn't do anything. It's because you couldn't do anything. It's because you had less options to begin with. Mid-range is all about options. Control and aggro, you have fewer options. You got to make those options count. Control on the later end, aggro on the earlier end. But still, like, if you don't give yourself those options with the draft, it's going to be a worse deck, and you're going to be helpless. And no pilot, doesn't matter how skilled you are, is going to get you out of that bind.
Midrange is also the easiest to play, the easiest to make decisions with, and the one
I
that
wouldn't say that. I don't think. I think control's the easiest to make decisions with. The more turns you have to make your decisions, the easier it gets. Control's the easiest per decision to make. You have more decisions. Aggro's the hardest per decision to make. Midrange is in the middle.
Control nowadays is not as easy as control used to be because a lot of the tools are not independently good. Sure, you still have like the meteors and flame strikes, but for a lot of stuff, even stuff like a warpath, right? Your opponent can set it up so that you don't have like a great warpath, especially before turn 10, right? When it's turn 10, you can deal 5 damage to everything. That's pretty good. That's usually enough.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're on turn 6 and you have just a crappy Hellfire, I'm just like, well, this isn't good enough, right? So I would say a lot of the control tools nowadays are, they're plentiful and they're powerful, but they're not like, require 0 setup powerful like we had with Fellfire, Dragonfire Potion, stuff like that.
That's true.
Yeah. So like because of that, this is why I like the meta, right? And I think this is why we say the meta is good, because even with all these powerful controlled decks, there's only a few cards in which I'm just like, well, this kind of is like a kind of cheap, right? Like I think Psychic Scream is a little bit cheap because no matter what you do, you get screamed and you're like, oh, well, I couldn't really do anything about that. But everything else I think is like somewhat fair, like Warpath by itself is fair. You can say Warriors as a package is unfair, but Warpath I think is fair. So that's my take on it.
I don't know how fair Warpath is, but that's a separate thing. I've always thought that cards with that Echo ability, especially spells, are on the not fair side. If you remember back in the day with the Forbidden cards, like how highly we rated them, just like the fact that you can get value out of it on any turn.
You really like those.
They were really good. They were like the epitome of flexibility.
I remember we rated Forbidden Ancient as, I don't know.
Like 150 back then, and that was like huge back then.
Oh my god.
It dropped a bit, but it never dropped below like 130. So it was always good. And people were like, what do you mean? It's like a whatever, it's like a 5/5 for 5 or 8/8 for 8 or whatever. How could it possibly be good? It's like the flexibility. It's your decision making. You have an extra decision every single turn. That's how you win the game. Like,
I don't think we ever reached agreement on that. But thankfully it's not in the rotation anymore.
So anyway, going to a mid-range deck is not like taking a step backwards as it was in Boomsday. I think historically, if you were talking about 2 years ago and any time before 2 years ago, mid-range is where it's at. Like, mid-range was the strongest archetype for a very long time. And then it slowly became an average archetype, and then it became the weakest archetype. And now it's back to being an average archetype. So if you ever need to switch, just pull the trigger. Like, don't try too hard to push the other archetypes. Because if you do, you're going to end up with a bad version of that kind of archetype. And that's worse than a decent version of the mid-range. And the biggest benefit of mid-range when it comes to the draft is you can't mess up the draft too badly. It's just not possible. It's mid-range, right? Like, if you know the game at all, like on a normal veteran level, right? Not like, oh, I'm a really good player, I'm a really good drafter, but just like, I've played the game, I've played the arena for a while. Like, I kind of know what decks win and what decks lose in a very general, fuzzy way. Then you'll be fine in a mid-range deck. The actual decision makings in mid-range, I would argue, are very nuanced in terms of when to trade, when to push, when to put more stuff on the board, when to put less stuff on the board and pull back. Because for every decision that you make as a control player, the mid-range player would have had to make a decision before you made that decision based on a prediction about what you had. And then you make a prediction based on what the mid-range player has. But the mid-range player always goes first, has a harder decision, and has more choices. Because the control player's decision is just to do X or do Y. Because they don't have cards that are playable. Whereas the mid-range player has like, do X, do Y, do Z, trade this way, do like a whole bunch of stuff that sets up. So I don't think it's a competition, or rather, what I mean by that is I don't think control will ever win a competition against mid-range on what requires more skill for similarly like powered decks. I do agree that control is less no-think than it used to be, but it's still less thinking than mid range on a per decision or per turn basis. So when do you revert to mid range? Let's say you're aggro. You revert to mid range when you have one really big card. Usually, I define as a 7 mana or above card. Merps would probably define it as a 6 mana or above card that does not do aggro things. And by aggro things, I don't even mean like reach necessarily. Like King Crush is not a aggro deck card.
Never pick. If you're making a Merps Hunter, it is a never pick.
Yeah,
King Crush, which is crazy for some people, right?
But it gets taunted, and you can't do any damage with it, and everyone has taunts now. And it doesn't matter if they're a small taunt. It's not worth it. You'd rather just consistently hero power after that. So, but if you had a card like Pyroblast, for example, that's still not a great pick for a deck as aggressive as you want to be as a hunter, but it's okay-ish. On the other hand, like for me at least, if I'm making an aggro hunter, like a Stormwind Champion is an okay, like I wouldn't pick it at its like regular value for an aggro deck, but I wouldn't say it breaks the entirety of like the aggro archetype. But something like a Boulder Fist Ogre, you're kind of in trouble. Something like a Line Breaker, and you're done. Like those
are solidly mid-range.
Those are solid mid-range cards. Totally, they're not like bad cards at all. But at that point, once you have one of those in your deck, because you weren't offered other things, or the other things you were offered were like such janky cards, you're gonna have to live with it, and you're gonna have to make a decision from that point on. Let's say that's the pick I made on pick 12. You can keep going down aggro and risk the chance that you're forced into another one of those decisions, right? Another decision where you look at it and it's like, oh, 7 mana, 8 mana, 9 mana. Those are my choices. Thank you, Blizzard. Or you can just at that point say, I already don't have a great aggro deck. I'm already like one card down. And then I'm just going to make a faster mid-range deck. I'm going to fill in the rest of my stuff with like slower cards that are more mid-rangey, because I have to kind of compensate for the fact that I went very aggro in my first like 12 picks. Don't compensate too much, because it can be faster aggro, right? You have faster mid-range. You don't have to go like all the way to mid-range. In fact, if you have drafted pretty aggressively in the beginning, you don't want to go all the way to mid-range. You want to be a faster mid-range. That's where your like sweet spot is at this point in the draft. But like be flexible and move to mid-range, and you'll have more success and more wins. On the control side, and similarly for aggro, if like for some reason you're like, hey, it's pick 16, I have 1/2 drop and 1/1 drop. I took all the 2 drops and 1 drop that was offered. This is not like an uncommon situation, by the way. Like if you don't count secrets as 2 drops, as you shouldn't for aggro, it happens. That's also when you may be like, well, you know, I have like 8 picks left. What are the odds? Literally all of them are going to give me a 1 or 2 drop. Near 0. So now I'm a mid-range deck, and I'm going to live with that.
Yeah. You know, something I want to kind of tell people, because I feel like a lot of people have seen my video guide for Aggro Hunter, and this is one of the first questions they ask. Like, well, okay, when do I revert, right? And I'll say this. I never revert, but that's me.
but so you also don't care about your win percentage in that way. Like, you're not trying to maximize your overall win percentage. You're trying to maximize, like, playing Aggro Hunter.
Well, I would say that it works very well, but I will also say that it is way too easy to get wrong, you know? And because of how well mid-range hunters does work, as shown by not only ADWCTA but also Dr. Stein.
Wait, so what happens? So what happens if you get offered, 3 9-mana cards, and those are your only choices, and you pick one of them, and it's like King Crush?
I've taken it before. So I had another Aggro Hunter deck that had Swamp King Dread, right?
Right.
Which is not just a big drop; it is a terrible big drop, because it gives your opponent's charge, right?
Exactly.
To get rid of my big minion.
Yep.
And it was fine. I mean, I drew it some games, but it was one of those where I had committed to it so hard, and then the pick came.
Okay, so it was like a very late pick.
You know? Yeah. So it was like a late pick, and I was like, okay, well, and I think this is like the best example of it, right? It's like the worst of the worst.
Right.
I fully committed to it, and it was like a later pick, and I'm like, okay, I can't switch to mid-range. I have to eat this pick. I have to eat this pick. It's not like Spider Bomb on turn 1, if you know what I mean. But but yeah, and it still worked. It still went 12. So it can work. But once again, was I a little bit lucky not to draw during the worst times? Sure. And I still had it in my opening hand for some games. I still was able to win off of that because of my incredible consistency otherwise, right? Like I try to draft consistent otherwise. But I will say, if you guys are not as familiar with aggro, I would say if you're used to playing aggro even before watching my guide, I would say it's more suitable. If you're not used to playing aggro, because there are some things, for example, like that I did not explain in my video, and I was talking to Stein, and he's like, yeah, I was talking to some people, and they were, they showed me their deck, and he's like, because Stein knows me by now. He's like, people are drafting Savannah Highmane. I was like, oh no. I was like, that's a never pick. And it might seem weird. They're like, whoa, wait, that's perfect for Aggro Hunter. I'm
no,
like,
it's fast mid-range.
Yeah,
or mid-range,
that's a mid-range
or slow
card.
mid-range even. Like, it's not an aggro card.
Right. And I was like, okay, because Savannah Highmane is in the top bucket.
Yeah.
I'm like, they are passing up. It's like if they passed up a jeweled McCall to take a Savannah Highmane, I'm like, all right, you're reducing your win percentage by a significant amount, right? So just stuff like that. It's nice if you guys are able to follow that. I strongly agree, maybe to stubbornly agree that or believe that the pure Aggro Hunter works, but it's much easier and much flexible to go into that mid-range to just be like, yeah, okay, I'll take that one worm. I'll take that one Stormwind champion. I'll take the Highmane because it fits and still get an incredibly high win rate with that. I think Stein's last 4 hunters have been 12s. I'm not exactly sure, but he almost always plays mid-range because he takes the value, right? I give up value. He takes the value, and then he does very well with it.
Yeah. And also, I want to highlight there's a very big difference between making you're forced into a large pick at pick 25 and at pick 15. Not only because you have less room to change your deck at that point anyway, but also because if it's at pick 15, you have 3 times higher chance of it happening to you again compared to this being at pick 25. And if it happens to you twice, if you are forced to take 2 really large cards that don't do much for your aggro deck, then it's really not going to work, right? If your deck is synergized enough that you can live with 1 card down, 2 cards down is always too much, to deal with the deck. Okay, now let's talk about it from the other side. You're making a control deck, you're bumbling along, and then all of a sudden you are forced into an aggro pick. You're fine. It's easier to make a control deck than an aggro deck because you're not as sensitive, because you have so much card draw or whatever. You can eat a small card if you need to, right? You may be like, I don't want 2 drops. And then Croc is by far the best card. And the other cards don't really help your control game at all. And you're like, all right, I guess I'll take a Croc. You're fine. Don't leave control just because you have a Croc. That's silly. Croc is still okay for you on turn 2, right? Like, even if it's worse than a Croc, even if you need to take a Murloc Raider, right? It's fine. You're going to be okay. You're a little less good, but you're going to be okay because your deck is just less sensitive because you're going in for the long haul, right? You have more chances, more turns to make up for a bad draw in the Murloc Raider context. But if this happens a few times, right? It's pick 15. You have 2 Murloc Raiders. Well, maybe stop being a control deck at that point. Like at that point, maybe try to use your Murloc Raiders, play a mid-range game. You'll be fine. So a little less on that side. On the other hand, control decks bust much harder than aggro decks on the other side, because you don't need aggro cards to be an aggro deck. You just need stuff to do, and your hero power kind of does the rest, or like a couple of particular cards, if it's like Savage Roar or buffs or whatever, does it. For your control deck, you need the Trinity. I'm going to call it the Trinity of Control in Hearthstone, which is one, a series of defensive cards that are decent sized taunts and or heals, like a lot of them. You need a fleet of these cards. 2, you need some kind of card advantage generation, whether it's adding cards to your hand, whether it's just like a lot of really big minions. You need some ways to get card advantage value in the end, so when you get to the end, you actually do have more cards than your opponent who is mid-range. Because your opponent, being mid-range, is going to get decent value off of you on trades and stuff all throughout the game. So you need a way to prevent that. So and three, you need to. Well, the third one is one that you can't get out of. That's why this episode started with me highlighting it. And three is you need to be able to stabilize and defend by turn 3. Like, not fully stabilized, but not just like continuously give up the board. And that's 3 drops. So if you get to a certain point and you're like, I have 0 3-drops. It's pick 15. I was offered no 3-drops. Or like was offered 2 in the beginning and I didn't take it to get some control value. And now it's pick like 16 or whatever and I have no 3-drops. And then you get offered a bunch of cards and one of them is like a good 2-drop. Maybe it's time to go a little more mid-range. Right? Like,
yeah.
These are ways that control decks bust. When their trinity is broken because you're estimating how many you'll get offered as the draft goes on and you're like not getting them. Or it could be even late in the draft. It could be pick like 22 and you just look around and you're like, oh, I wanted to go a control deck, but I have like 2 cards that are 7 mana or above. And my deck is like, it's just kind of mid-rangey, but I only have 3 2-drops. It's like, okay, take some 2-drops now. Be an actual mid-range deck. Because you're going to be a really failed control deck, which is not going to get you anywhere.
Very true.
So those are the conditions for reverting to mid-range, right? They're different. I mean, it happens in both parts, but it's more so I get a few unlucky offerings for aggro that doesn't fit my game plan. For control, it's more like I don't get enough stuff that enables my game plan. In either of those cases, go into mid-range. You'll have more overall success just because the draft is going to work out better for you. Don't like you're less sensitive to this than you were pre-buckets, but it's still a good strategy. For me, I always start out in mid-range anyway, so that's why you see very few decks that you'll see me play that actually go aggro or control. It really takes the draft dragging me towards aggro or control for me to go there. Like, I had a control warrior deck that went 12. This should be on YouTube by Wednesday. And that was because I was like taking the new cards and I was like, oh, what do you know? I have a ridiculous amount of value. I guess I'll go control now, like after like 7 picks. But for the most part, I've never regretted going back to mid-range. Even if my draft had taken me somewhere and then I was like moving backwards. I'm very flexible in that. So, okay. It's more like on the extreme ends that you really like should do it to get a higher win rate. Like, but it's nicer. Like, I don't know. Maybe you guys retire decks. I never retire a deck. And I really hate playing like busted control or busted aggro decks. I much more prefer playing that 12-win druid you see on our YouTube from day 2, I want to say, of the Rastakhan meta that we called boring because I cannot think of a more boring deck that I've ever played in my life. But that's boring. Fine. That's fundamentals, right? It's fundamentals Hearthstone. And we're going to play Druid today after the Lightforge 2. And, we're going to try to make it go places. But if it ends up boring and going 12 again, I don't mind.
Sure.
All right. You want to do a question from the GOAT?
Yeah, sure. Question from the GOAT. This doesn't come from anyone on our subreddit. I just want to talk a little bit about some other games that we're playing potentially. Oh my gosh, playing other games. I haven't played a lot, but Smash Ultimate has come out recently. You have it, I have it. How's it going?
So I'm going to preface this by saying we were huge Smash dorks in high school. And Melee, right, because we're old. And I continue playing it a lot. Did you play a lot of Melee as well in college or no?
Yeah, I played a lot of Melee.
Yeah, so we all, like, our group of friends all split up, and we all played a decent amount of Melee in college. And then we would get back in the holidays and, like, play again at someone's house. And people's skill ranges kind of changed. Like, Freddie got insane. Like, he's just normally like the rest of us by the end of high school. And then at a certain point, we couldn't play with him anymore.
Well, it all depends on your competition, right? Like, so much of it depends on who you're playing with as well.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, I'm not very good. I'm like, no, you're destroying us. And we're, like, decent, at least. Like, we're definitely not bad at this game. Anyway. So then I haven't touched a game since. I bought the Wii version, and it was like I played maybe 15 minutes of it before I'm like, all right, I'm not playing this anymore. And I didn't touch the Brawl, the Wii U version or the 3DS version. So That's where we're coming in from this, and Ultimate's been a blast. I did not expect to enjoy the game this much, and things feel like they're more back to melee than they were in the other games in the series, and I've had a very interesting online experience too, where I realized that because I only know melee characters, that's like what 22 out of the 60. I don't know anyone else's moves, and online they just destroy me because I have no way to anticipate their moves. So my main, who I am sure I am way better at than any other character, is Peach. But I need like a lot of skill on that in terms of knowing when to punish people and when people overcommit and just like zoning people the right way and stuff. And having no idea how any of the people work. I suck with Peach right now. I'm like a 1 mil GSP with Corrin, who like I just have to keep the appropriate spacing and I'm good. Whereas for Peach, I'm like 400k, which is pretty low. Like I feel like 400k is probably like actually like average among all people who play Smash Online.
Spam
like,
that down smash.
Like 3-win arena run level, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty sad. But yeah, what about you? Who's your main? Have you tried out stuff in Ultimate yet?
I've only unlocked like 5 characters. I've just been really busy with work. I will say it feels pretty good, you know? It feels pretty good, and I've tried out some of the characters that I'm more familiar with. Like,
have you unlocked Pichu yet?
I haven't even unlocked Pichu. I used to play Pichu a decent amount.
Pichu's supposed to be really good now. I know I get screwed by him a lot.
Is it just as powerful, like up smash and forward smash?
No,
or
he's just really fast, and I play really slow characters because I can't react in time, and that doesn't help against Pichu's when you can't react in time. Like, I'm a slow old man. I play to my advantages, which is usually like knowing how things work, but I don't know how things work with these new characters, so I have no advantages. So my only advantage is like punishing people for being at the wrong distance away from me as Corrin and like pulling combos off and stuff. And I can't do that with Pichu. I can't even hit Pichu. Like Corrin,
I've heard DK is pretty good. Maybe you should play DK.
No, I destroy every DK. And, okay, my win rate against old melee characters is over 85%. My win rate against the rest of the field is like 33%. Because I don't know how they work. Like, so I can't play very effectively.
So you face like an Inkling and you just lose.
Oh no, I could do Inkling now. I've seen so many Inklings and so many Simons that I got them now. I still can't deal with K-Rool.
Simon is really popular.
Yeah, Simon's really popular. But like most people just figure out how to spam his projectiles and like they're like, oh, I'm good now. And I'm like, no, I can learn your projectiles. That's not the hard part. It's like the more like the movements and the like the timings and things that I get problematic with. Like K-Rool still screws
trainer.
Me. Yeah, I have no idea. That character is just designed to screw with every preconceived notion that you have about how Smash works.
Yeah, Wii Fit Trainer is really weird.
It's like I can't describe how it's weird. It's more like its attack doesn't come from where you think it's going to attack, and the timings are not where you think. Yeah, and the hitboxes are not
very surprising. They're very, very surprising. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't beat any Wii Fit Trainer. Oh, someone used God, what is it? The new Incineroar. I have problems with Incineroar. He sucks. I know he sucks, but his moves are weird. They're not normal. He's not like an anime sword guy where I'm like, I may not have seen Ike before, but I pretty much know what's going on, and I can destroy
all the Fire
you.
Emblem people, you know, kind of their kit, right?
Yeah,
basically, it's like, okay, they're kind of like this. Yeah, Incineroar is a little bit different.
Yeah.
But no, it's been fun. You can tell like how we're talking about it a lot. It's been fun, and I've yesterday was the first day that I have had free time. I'm just like, all right, now I can finally play some Ultimate, or I was even thinking about going back to Overwatch.
Oh damn! Back to Overwatch.
Know. Would you be up for that?
Back to Overwatch?
Yeah.
No, I'm on an Ultimate kick right now. I may be back to Overwatch at some point, but not right now.
Okay. Anyways, that's where we're at. Like, I think both of us anticipate having some time in the upcoming weeks, so you'll probably hear us talking more about
the holiday season, right? That's for playing video games. We all know this.
It is true. I mean, that's kind of what I equate it to.
All right, let's end this. So that's a question from the GOAT brought to you by our Patreons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much for your support. And if you have a question from the GOAT, you can put it on our Reddit or tweet it to us. We'll see it all. There's a permanent thread on our Reddit for it. So yeah, card good bad, which we now also discuss on our Reddit, and we're going to be more consistent about teeing up the next one. So there's actually so we can read actual discussions about it beforehand. So I wanted to get some feedback on this card, which we rated very high. It's Snapjaw Shellfighter. And we rated a 130, which I think at the time was the second highest neutral card behind the Dragon. And now is, it was the third highest behind the Dragon and behind Announcer. Now it's like the fourth because we moved Ticket Scalper up. But still, it's a really powerful card, 130. It is, however, an epic minion, which means you don't get offered it too much. And it turns out it ended up being in, I think, like the 6 bucket. Or just something really small, and so you really don't get offered it. So I got offered it on my very first draft, and I picked it. And I don't think I was offered it again. At this point, we must have drafted 15 times or whatever. But I have not seen it offered again. So I was seeing how other people felt again. I also almost never see it played by my opponent. And so far, at least in that one run that I had, it seemed pretty good. I was able to use it the way I thought I was going to use it, right? As putting it next to a taunt to protect the taunt, including one time a gastropod. I was able to use it as a weird version of a Death Speaker to kind of take the hit for a creature that already had initiative on the board so it doesn't die. And just generally protects stuff with abilities. And at 8 health, it does a lot. So I thought it was fine. And it seems like from reading the Reddit, other people have really not played or seen it either. Everyone's
that's the first thing that people say. They're like, okay, well, I haven't seen it, but the one time I did see it, pretty good. That's what happens with the bucketing system, right? Even good cards are very rarely seen. But I think, looking at all of the comments here, people somewhat universally agree that when they have seen it, whether it's on their side or the opponent's side, it's been very annoying. People have used it to good effect. And I've seen it a couple times on other people's streams as well, and they've gotten good uses out of it to protect minions that have very high attack, low health. I haven't seen the dream situation with a gastropod yet, but I'm sure that exists, and that's just game winning by itself. So
the problem with gastropod is always getting it to live for a turn, or I guess for this waiting for turn 7. But yeah. By the way, if I realized I didn't say what the card is. The card is a 5 mana 3/8 that protects the creatures next to it. Adjacent creatures, if it gets hit or gets taken damage, this card takes the damage for it instead. It's a weird concept. It takes a while for you to wrap your head around it, and I know Blizzard previews these concepts a lot before making the main game concepts that judges feedback. This one's a little confusing. I don't know if I want to see more cards like this, but it's definitely very powerful of an effect. Okay, so next week's card good bad, we're gonna keep these deep dives going for now. I feel like you guys know that Blast Wave is good. I don't really need to tell you that. But Arena Fanatic is what we'll talk about next week. We rated basically a 100, significantly below a Yeti, but a pickable card, especially for its bucket. And I want to see people's experiences with this, because I think I picked it once and I didn't get very good use out of it, but I've been destroyed by this card a number of times. And,
you have?
Oh, wow, yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. It seems like every warrior has it. And, they're warriors. So this card gets a lot of use. So it's going to be pretty archetype dependent, I think. But yeah, I want to see you guys' hear you guys' experiences with it, either playing as it or playing against it. And I think that wraps up our podcast. Any last words?
Nope, that's it. Good luck in the arena, guys.
Until next time, this is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Bye-bye.